The cemetery was full, the air quiet except for the scattered whispers of those who came to pay their respects. There I was, Sarah, stuck in my wheelchair, feeling like an island in the middle of a somber black ocean. My dad, John, was there too, cracking jokes as if we were at a backyard barbecue instead of Mom's funeral. Elaine, with her hawk-like eyes and that smile that never quite reached them, was by his side. She was the nurse who was supposed to make things easier after Mom got sick, but all she did was make my skin crawl. "Dad, how can you be laughing at a time like this?" I asked, my hands tight on the wheels of my chair. He looked at me, his chuckle trailing off as he wiped a hand across his face. "Oh, lighten up, will you? Life goes on. Besides, she'd want us to be happy." "Happy?" I almost shouted. "Mom's not even cold, and you're—" "Enough, Sarah," he cut me off, his voice harsh. "Put a cap on it, will ya?" I stilled, the lump in my throat growing. Aunt Grace came over, laying a hand on my shoulder in a bid to calm me. "Sweetheart, let's not do this here," she whispered, sounding as tired as I felt. I nodded, watching his dad turn back to Elaine, who was eyeing me like a cat waiting for a mouse to make a move. Uncle George, Mom's brother and always a pillar of quiet strength, joined Aunt Grace by my side. He gave me a slight nod, his face showing the lines that grief had etched deeper. "Don't let him get to you," George murmured, handing me a tissue. "I'm not," I lied, wiping at my eyes. The preacher was talking now, saying words about God, life, and the hereafter, but it all sounded like static. My mind was elsewhere, on Dad and Elaine, the way they were too close, the way she was with him all the time now, how he needed her support. As people moved to throw dirt onto the casket, Dad's laugh rang out again. It was loud and grating. I caught bits and pieces of what he said to one of Mom's old friends. "Yeah, it's rough, but what can you do, huh? Gotta keep on truckin'." I couldn't stay silent. "Dad," I said louder than I intended, "don't you think you could pretend, just for today?" He turned to me, his eyes narrowed. "Sarah, don't start." "Pretend? That's rich comin' from you," Elaine chimed in, her voice sharp. "You're always the victim." I looked at her, feeling the anger rising. What's that supposed to mean? "Girls, not now," Aunt Grace said, trying to smooth things over like she always did. "Yeah, Sarah. Give it a rest," Dad added with a dismissive wave, before turning his back on me. As folks started to disperse, I talked with some of Mom's friends and our distant relatives. The usual "she was such a good person, and if you need anything, let us know," filled the air. They meant well, I knew that, but their words felt empty. George wheeled me back to the van after it was all over, Aunt Grace following silently. "I can't believe him," I muttered as we neared the vehicle. "He's always been rough around the edges," George said, his eyebrows coming together. "That's one way to put it," I scoffed. Aunt Grace helped me get into the van, her hands gentle. "You know he's grieving in his own way," she said. I nodded, though inside I felt a storm brewing. His way of grieving didn't sit right with me, not at all. The ride home was quiet, the kind of silence that weighs on you, heavy as a blanket. I stared out the window, watching the world go on as if nothing had happened. It felt like a betrayal, the sun shining, people walking their dogs, laughing. When we got to my house, where Elaine was now a constant presence, I felt trapped. This was supposed to be home, but it felt nothing like it used to, with Mom's laughter echoing off the walls, her love filling up the rooms. Since the spinal injury, my life felt like a series of unfortunate events, each day bringing a new challenge. I wasn't just learning to navigate my new reality, I was also learning to deal with the person who was supposed to be my helper, Elaine, the nurse. The first incident with Elaine felt like an honest mistake. She had brought me a cup of tea, her hands seemingly unsteady. I remember watching in horror as the cup tilted, the hot liquid pouring down onto my lap. Pain seared through me, not just from the burn, but from the shock of betrayal. "It was just an accident, Sarah," she had said, all innocent-like, but her eyes didn't meet mine, and her voice was too even. I wanted to tell her I knew that look, the look of someone hiding something, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, soaked and scalded, trying to nurse my wound and my pride. The next torment came on a day that seemed just as ordinary as any had been since my accident. Elaine left me alone in the garden, saying I could use some fresh air. That wasn't unusual, but what happened next was. She forgot to close the gate. One moment I was alone, and the next, I was encircled by a pack of stray dogs, their eyes on me, growls filling the silence. Fear clenched my heart as they drew closer. I couldn't move, couldn't escape. Elaine watched from the window, motionless. It took George, coming by for his visit, to rescue me from what could have been a gruesome fate. When I told my parents, especially Dad, about how Elaine had been acting, I was met with nothing but cold disbelief. "You're just seeing things, Sarah. You're angry and frustrated." "I understand that, but Elaine is here to help," my dad had said defensively. I shot back with all the bitterness I could muster. "Is she, Dad? Because it seems like she's doing everything but." His face hardened, and then he said something that left me feeling raw and hollow. "You're just jealous of her. She can walk. She's healthy. You're not." That stung deep. It wasn't about jealousy, it was about feeling safe in my own home. And it was clear after that conversation that my safety was less important than confronting an uncomfortable truth. I was alone in this, well, almost alone. I had George and I had my own wits about me. And as the evening drew in, casting long shadows across my room, I realized that if I wanted to feel safe again, to take back some control, I would need to fight this battle myself. It was a terrifying thought, but there was no alternative. The smell of tension was thick in the air as I rolled into the kitchen, my hands trembling at the thought of what I had to say. I could feel my frustration boiling over as I thought about how Dad never showed any love towards Mom or me. He made it abundantly clear that all he saw when he looked at us was money and the inconvenience we represented. "Dad, why do you even stay if you don't care about us? Just for the money?" I asked with a mix of anger and sorrow. He didn't even flinch, just leaned back against the counter with a smirk. "Someone had to tell you, I suppose. Your grandfather's gone, and I don't have to pretend anymore." "You're vile," I spat, the words tasting bitter on my lips. He shrugged, nonchalant. "You know, your mom begged me to tell her why I was always late. So, I laid it out plain and simple for her. I married her for her daddy's money. And now that he's out of the picture, I don't have to play nice." Mom's eyes were drowned in sorrow, but she didn't move, didn't speak. I couldn't understand her silence, her acceptance. "Why do you let him treat you this way?" I asked her, rolling closer, so she couldn't ignore me. She wrung her hands, looking down at them as if the answers might be hidden in her palms. "Because I love him," she mumbled, a broken record repeating the same sad tune. "That's your reason?" My voice cracked, heavy with the weight of my tears. "He calls me a worthless invalid, a parasite, and says I'm just taking up space. How can you love someone like that?" She looked at me then, her eyes rimmed red. "Sarah, love isn't always simple. It isn't always kind." I let out a sob, her words were like knives. She still clung to whatever scraps of love he used to pretend to give her. Meanwhile, every awful thing he said to me, about me, gouged out pieces of my heart, leaving me hollower each time. "You're crying because you know it's true. That's all you are, Sarah. A burden. Always have been." My father's voice cut through the room, each word a calculated blow trying to knock me down further. I couldn't hold back the sobs that racked my body, feeling each word like a physical blow. "Why are you like this?" I choked out. He shrugged, as if my pain was nothing more than a speck of dust to him. "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" Mom finally sprang to life, her voice a whisper but fierce all the same. "Stop it. That's our daughter you're talking about." He gave a dry laugh. "And she's as pathetic as you are. Both of you, under my feet all day." I turned away from them both, my heart splintering into sharp, jagged pieces. I didn't want to see his contempt or her resigned pain anymore. I couldn't fathom how this was the same man she had loved, the same man who was my father. That night was a game changer. The house was quiet, too quiet. I was heading to the kitchen for some water when I saw them. Dad and Elaine from next door, all cozy on the couch. The moment hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't make a sound, just watched for a second before backing out of the room. The image was burned into my head, though. I found Mom in her bedroom, reading a magazine like everything was normal. It wasn't. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I blurted out, my voice shaky but urgent. She put her magazine down and sat up, honed in on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, brows knitted. I swallowed hard, the words taking their sweet time. "I saw Dad with Elaine, they were." Her face went from concern to dark, real quick. "I see. When?" "Just now, in the living room," I said, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. She didn't say a word for a minute, just stood up, and went straight for the living room. I trailed behind her, kinda scared but knowing this had to be done. The two of them were still there, laughing at something on TV. But the laughs died as soon as Mom walked in. Dad's face, it was priceless. "Oh, Sarah. I'll handle this," Mom whispered to me without taking her eyes off them. Then she turned her fire on Dad. "So this is what you do? This is how you get your kicks?" Dad stood up, acting all innocent. "What's the problem? We're just watching a show." Mom was having none of it. "Cut the crap, we're not stupid," she snapped. Elaine must have figured out it was time to go because she headed for the door fast. "I better go," she muttered, but Mom stopped her right there. "Sit," Mom commanded. Elaine sat. We'll deal with later. But you," Mom turned to Dad, "you're gonna regret your selfishness. You think you can mess around in my house?" Dad tried to say something, but Mom wasn't done. "And you," she said to me, "go to your room. This ain't for the kids." "But Mom." "Go. Please, Sarah." I turned and went to my room, the yelling starting up behind me. I left the door open just a crack and listened. There were some things that couldn't be unsaid once they were out there. Dad's voice got loud. "So what if I am? You gonna throw me out? Over her?" Mom fired back, louder. "You're damn right I will. You're trash, and I'm done." The fight went on for what felt like hours. Accusations flying, hard words that couldn't be taken back. It ended with Dad storming out, slamming the door so hard the whole house shook. Life flipped on its head when we got the call about Mom's accident. The confusion was one thing, Dad marrying Elaine was a whole new level of low. But the kicker was when he looked at me with those dead eyes of his and dropped the bomb. "I'm tired of dealing with this cripple. It's time she's someone else's problem," he hissed, his voice was harsh, and it echoed in the emptying house. I felt like something inside me was crumbling. I'd never been anything but an inconvenience to him, but hearing it said out loud, it was a different kind of pain. That's when Uncle George barged in, old tweed jacket and all, just as the words hung in the air like smoke. "She's not a problem, she's family, and she's coming with me." Dad laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "What, you? Gonna play daddy? Good riddance. Take her." Uncle George didn't even blink. "Yeah, I'll take her. Someone's gotta show the girl some decency." "You think you can do better? Be my guest," Dad sneered, crossing his arms as if he'd won some twisted game. Uncle George just turned to me, ignoring the poison in the air. "Pack your stuff, kiddo. We're leaving this dump." I nodded, trying to ignore the lump in my throat. "Give me 10 minutes, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take your time. We ain't in a rush," Uncle George replied, and I caught the hint of a smile. In my room, surrounded by what was left of my old life, I shoved clothes and essentials into a bag. Each item felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't understand yet. Dad's voice boomed from the hallway as I zipped the bag closed. Make sure she takes all her crap. Don't want anything left reminding me of this mess. Uncle George's reply was calm, steady as a rock. Only crap in this house is your attitude. I tried not to listen, tried to focus on the sound of the zipper instead of the break in my heart. When I wheeled out of my room, bag on my lap, Uncle George was waiting. His gaze stuck to Dad for a brief moment. There was no love lost there. He looked back at me, his eyes soft. Ready? As I'll ever be, I said, forcing a smile. But somewhere under the fear and betrayal, there was this tiny, fragile sense of something new. Hope, maybe. We left without looking back. Dad's voice echoed in the empty hallway behind us, but it was fading, getting drowned out by the sound of Uncle George's old sedan firing up. 2 months had whooshed past when a knock rattled the front door at Uncle George's place. There he was, Dad, his appearance scruffy, eyes wild. Sarah, you're rich. Your mother left everything to you. He blurted it out like it was gonna fix everything, like money could gloss over the rotten things he'd done. And why would she do that for me, huh, Dad? Because you betrayed her, that's why. I shot back, my voice heavy with a mix of scorn and disbelief. Dad shuffled his feet, looking anywhere but at me. Look, I know I messed up, but nothing, Uncle George cut in, his voice hard as nails. You made your bed, now get lost. You can't just shut me out. I'm her father, Dad protested, his voice cracking with desperation. Funny way of showing it, turning up after all this time, 'cause there's money in the wind. Uncle George's stance was like a tree, firm and unyielding. His words hung there, stinging with truth. Dad looked deflated, smaller somehow. Isn't there anything you want from me? Yeah, I said, gripping my chair's armrests. I want you to leave. The words felt like pebbles rolling off my tongue, heavy and final. Dad's face twisted, and for a split second, I saw something like pain flicker in his eyes. He stumbled backward off the porch, gave one last pitiful look, and walked away. Uncle George slammed the door and turned to me, eyebrows raised. You good? I nodded, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The silence in the house was filled with the weight of what had just happened, but it felt right. It felt just. Later, sitting with the lawyer, the numbers and talks of estates and accounts washed over me. It was a lot, more than I'd ever imagined. So, you're telling me all this is mine? I asked, pointing at the papers spread out on the kitchen table. Yes, Sarah. It's all yours, every cent, the lawyer confirmed with a nod. Reality was sinking in, slowly, a little shocking and a lot overwhelming. Uncle George whistled low. Guess your mom made sure you'd be okay. I couldn't help but smile, bittersweet as it was. Yeah, she did, didn't she? Uncle George ruffled my hair, something only he could get away with. Your mom was a smart woman. Peering out the window, I couldn't help but catch the drama unfolding like a car crash you can't look away from. Elaine was out there shredding Dad apart with her words. I don't need this, I don't need an old broke man. Her voice was shrill, slicing through the quiet street like a siren. Elaine, please, I love you. I have nothing without you. Dad reached for her arm, but she shook him off like he was some annoying bug, not her husband of the past few years. I could almost see his heart break from here, the way his posture crumbled. Once a towering figure, now just a crumpled shell. Elaine snorted. Love? Don't make me laugh. You're useless to me now. Find someone else to leech off. With those words, she stormed off, her heels clicking against the pavement like a stopwatch, counting down the seconds of Dad's dignity as it crumbled away. Leaning back from the window, I sat down heavily at the kitchen table where Uncle George was doing the crossword, unaware of the soap opera that just ended outside. Elaine's gone, I said bluntly. Figured she would. The woman's got the loyalty of a cat in a fish shop. He didn't look up from his paper. I huffed a laugh, despite the heaviness of the situation. What now? Now? You live your life, Uncle George said, filling in an answer with a confident scribble. but guilt gnawed at me. Shouldn't we help him? Sarah, there's a difference between helping someone who falls into a hole and someone who digs one for himself and jumps in. He finally looked up at me with those clear eyes of his. You're right, I sighed, my gaze drifting back to the window, half expecting to see Dad still standing there. But he was gone. The rest of the day passed quietly, the neighborhood unaware of the little drama that had just shifted the tides in our small world. At bedtime, as I stared up at the ceiling, Dad's broken figure haunted the edges of my thoughts. Elaine had shown her colors, and they were as stark as a winter sky. Had we ever been a family? Or was it all just pretty lies wrapped around ugly truths? Sleep didn't come easy that night. I had money, sure. A new life, yeah. But there in the quiet, everything felt like it was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name. And I had a creeping feeling it was up to me to make sure it didn't all just fall apart. Please, Sarah. Let me stay. I have nowhere to go. Dad stood at my doorstep, fumbling with the hem of his weathered coat, looking a far cry from the imposing man he once was. You've made your bed, Dad. Now sleep in it. My words were cold, necessary ice. I had to be strong, for my own sake. He sighed, a deep, rattling breath that seemed to shake his fragile frame. Without another word, he turned, his steps heavy as he walked away. And then, as I watched him go, Esther, my new nurse, came up beside me. You okay? Yeah, I replied. I have to be. Esther just nodded, knowing better than to push. That's what I appreciated about her, she gave me space to breathe. The week that followed was a blur of activity. Meetings with Uncle George and Aunt Grace did more than fill my days, they were healing the old wounds with a salve made of genuine care. So, what's next for you, Sarah? Aunt Grace asked one evening, her voice as straightforward as the rest of her. Picking up the pieces, I guess. Building something, mine, I said, my hands folding around a coffee mug, a piece of normalcy. Uncle George chuckled, "Atta girl. That's the spirit." It felt good, creating a new routine, finding some footing on this unfamiliar path. But it was not without its hurdles. Sarah, have you thought more about that job offer? Esther's voice broke through my thoughts one afternoon. Yeah, I mumbled, but can I leave the past behind? You don't leave it, she said, her voice firm but gentle. You build on it. I pondered her words, realizing there was wisdom there. I didn't have to forget where I came from, but I didn't have to live there either. So I dove in. Took the job. Spent my days learning, growing stronger, both in mind and heart. The work was hard, but rewarding. And surprisingly, my past, the pain and the fallouts, shaped me, gave me an edge. I connected, understood, and empathy became my tool. Evenings were for family, real family. And my home began filling with laughter, the sounds of Uncle George's terrible jokes, Esther's calm wisdom, and Aunt Grace's no-nonsense love. Ever think you'd get here? Esther asked one evening as we relaxed in the living room. Not in a million years, I admitted. Life's funny like that, Uncle George interjected with a smirk. Just when you think you've got it figured out, it throws a pie in your face. More like a damn hurricane, I countered with a smile. A hurricane that cleared the path, Aunt Grace said, echoing the thoughts I hadn't dared to voice. I looked around at these people, my people. We were an odd bunch, a patchwork family, but we fit together somehow, like pieces in a puzzle I didn't know I was completing. You know, I started, a warmth spreading through me as I spoke, all this talk of weather makes me think we've weathered the storm pretty well. There she is, Uncle George nodded, raising his mug. Our Sarah, stronger than the toughest gale. Esther raised her glass too, and Aunt Grace followed, their smiles saying more than words ever could. So, I raised my mug, a silent thank you to the past for forging my future, to the struggles that showed me my strengths, and to the realization that sometimes, the hardest thing and the right thing were the same.